Throughout the years of World of Warcraft's lifetime, there have been thousands of NPCs and stories added to the game, many of which build off of previously established storylines and lore, but sometimes there is a story that Blizzard seems to begin, but ultimately forgets about in the long run of the game's development. And this is one such case, a questline that was originally introduced to the game during Classic WoW, that if it had been continued, would have had groundbreaking effects on the lore and even the gameplay. So without further ado, let's rewind the clock back to 2004 and discover this forgotten gem of a questline in World of Warcraft that most likely many of you have never even heard of. Real fast though, I do have to give a quick shout out to this channel's sponsor, Zygor. It is World of Warcraft's ultimate leveling guide, gold making guide, mounts, pets, achievements, whatever you want. It is linked down below in the description, and you can use code NIXIUM for 20% off. Tirisfal Glades is a zone that is absolutely packed with lore and story, both on the surface and beneath. Fans of Warcraft 3 will recognize this area as the former heart of the Kingdom of Lordaeron, the human kingdom that Arthas Menethil was once the prince of. And although in the past this land was a beacon of light and humanity's prosperity in the north, now it's just a decayed ruin of what it once was, overrun with mindless scourge, zealot Scarlet Crusaders, and the recently freed Forsaken trying to rebuild some semblance of what their lives used to be in their decayed homeland. The zone is horribly grim and depressing, whose quests have you not only taking out anger upon the scourge that brought ruin to the kingdom, but also upon the Scarlet Crusade, who just see the Forsaken as monsters, despite the fact that they've regained their free wills and ability to think for themselves. Frequently, you're going to find quests that embody how cold the Forsaken have become in their undeath, where they throw aside trinkets of former loved ones, they share no empathy towards their prisoners, and they even show that they have no loyalty towards their fellow Horde faction members. The Forsaken care for nothing and nobody except themselves, as they too see themselves as cursed and forsaken by the holy light. Now, worshipping the cult of the Forgotten Shadow in the ruins of Lordaeron's former capital city, the Forsaken silently await their day when they can unleash their pain upon the whole of Azeroth, who has judged them so cruelly. And it's among these quests that you'll find one storyline in particular that, admittingly, many people skip due to its requirement of long runs all throughout Tirisfal Glades, that being the Prodigal Lich storyline of Brightwater Lake, a story that could have changed the entire World of Warcraft as we know it had Blizzard continued it in later expansions. The questline begins in the town of Brill, where players will encounter the magistrate Severin, who instructs them to venture to the Undercity to seek out Bethor Ishard in the Magic Quarter. Bethor is a high-ranking and very powerful mage, the player is told, who is seeking assistance, an agent to assist him with fighting against the Scourge. Now, we're not told much as to exactly what Bethor wants us to do, but the quest does drop an immediate major hint that would leave any Warcraft 3 fan back in 2004 eager to figure out what happens next. This is what you are told.
Present these orders to Bethor. He will instruct you on your mission. I don't know its details, but it deals with recruiting a wayward lich, and it will be dangerous. So ready yourself. You must not fail.
Now, for those that don't know, a Lich is an incredibly powerful necromancer, or leader most of the time, within the Scourge, blessed with eternal life by the Lich King himself, as well as this horrifying, hovering skeletal form. The most famous Lich is, of course, Kel'Thuzad, who players interacted with extensively back in Warcraft 3. So the idea that there's a wayward Lich who the Forsaken want to recruit into their ranks, like, that idea sounds not only epic, but it certainly sounds very dangerous as well. It's a great beginning to an awesome quest line. After a bit of running and reaching the Magic Quarter in the Undercity, the players will meet Bethor Ishard, who is quick to give us a rundown of what exactly he is looking for us to do. We are told that there is an island in the middle of Brightwater Lake in Tirisfal Glades, and located on that island is a lich who has taken up residence. Curiously though, Bethor tells us that this lich is not a skeletal horror like Kel'Thuzad or other liches from Warcraft 3, but a Forsaken of free will. However, this lich believes that all other undead that he encounters or has encountered, including the Forsaken, he sees them as scourge slaves, so he attacks anybody who approaches him. The player is also told that this lich is specifically desired by the Banshee Queen due to his immense knowledge of necromancy, but before he can be recruited, his identity in his life and his talents need to be fully understood first by Bethor and the mages of the Magic Quarter. Therefore, you are told to sneak into his camp on his little island, steal his spellbook, and return it to Bethor so that he can study it. I always found this phase of the quest to be so fascinating because it reveals to us two things about the mysterious lich that we are about to encounter. The first is that apparently a lich in the lore doesn't necessarily need to be a giant floating skeletal monster like what we've seen with Kel'Thuzad and other liches from Warcraft 3. And second, whoever this Forsaken is, he has to be truly incredibly powerful, insanely powerful in fact, to be put on the same tier as a lich from the Scourge, despite just being a simple Forsaken. But who is this man exactly? Well, the quest is about to continue because we have to learn more. After a very lengthy run back into Tirisfal Glades, players will find themselves at the water's edge of Brightwater Lake. The island, players quickly discover, is covered with multiple roaming undead bodyguards, all of whom will attack you on sight. And the Lich that we have heard so much about, he stands simply at the head of the zombie horde beside this small campsite that he has constructed for himself. You can't speak to him, but you are able to snag his spellbook after fighting through his guards, which means it's time for you to take yet another trip back to the Undercity, back to Bethor. You can already see why a lot of people skip this quest. It's a lot of running. But if you can tolerate the journey upon returning to the Magic Quarter, it is revealed that the so-called Lich on the island is none other than Gunther Arcanus, who Bethor knew in his life. Gunther Arcanus, Bethor explains, was a friend of his, along with Thule Ravenclaw, who players might remember from Silverpine Forest. He's the leader of the Rothhide Gnolls, but this video is not about him. The point is, the three of them were members of the Kirin Tor, and Gunther Arcanus, despite necromancy being illegal, he studied the art in secret. Now, Bethor says that knowing now that Gunther is hidden away in Tirisfal, the Forsaken must have his necromantic talents, and you, being the adventurer and his agent, are tasked with convincing him to join up under the Dark Lady's banner. So, back to Brightwater Lake you go, yet again. Now, the journey is worth it because upon returning, we learn some pretty incredible things about this seemingly insignificant NPC on this tiny island. First of all, though, it is important to mention that Bethor does put a magical spell on the Lich's spellbook to convince him of his freedom from the Lich King's control. Remember, Gunther just kind of attacks everybody on sight because he thinks he's the only undead with free will. And even though Gunther does see this spell and hear Bethor's message, he isn't really fully convinced yet. He needs a little bit more. So he tells you to prove that you too are no longer bound by the Lich King's control by summoning a very powerful Scourge agent, Lilith Nefara, and to slay her. You use a candle nearby, a special table that's found on the Lich's island, and after a pretty dangerous fight, you're able to go back to Gunther and demonstrate that yes, you too have free will, and now truly he is convinced. And it's at this stage of the quest chain that we start learning a little bit more about this NPC. Specifically, we learn that Gunther was so powerful as a necromancer in his life that even after being raised as an undead by the Lich King, he was able to break free of Arthas's control, completely on his own. This revelation is incredible because, to my knowledge, Gunther is the only person in all of Azeroth that we know of that was able to accomplish something like this. Clearly, this Lich, this Gunther Arcanus, must be incredibly powerful that he can challenge the domination of the Lich King. He gives you a communication shard. We return to Bethor to deliver it, allowing the two friends to communicate, and they reunite after all this time apart. And with that, the questline ends with Gunther agreeing to join the Forsaken to teach the undead of the Undercity necromancy. But here's the curious thing though. This story, this NPC, Gunther Arcanus, we never hear another word about him in World of Warcraft. Even later on in Classic WoW, we do encounter a really long quest chain where we fight against Thule Ravenclaw on Fenris Isle. And even though this quest chain involves Bethor Ice Shard, there's never again a mention of Gunther Arcanus in the game, even after 20 years of expansions and story development. The main reason why I wanted to make this video is because I don't think there is any other NPC in World of Warcraft that has been established as being so powerful, so influential, and yet was so easily forgotten by Blizzard in their writing room. A necromancer in life that was so skilled that he could break the domination of the Lich King by his own willpower with no assistance at all, long before the Lich King began to lose some of his power due to Illidan's meddlings in Warcraft 3. That is an insane degree of magical power, mastery, and will that this character possesses, and the fact that he's recruited to the Forsaken specifically to bring the skill of necromancy into the Horde, that's a huge thing too. So my guess when it comes to this questline and this NPC is that Gunther exists primarily to bring the Necromancer class into World of Warcraft at some point in the future. For those that don't know, the Necromancer actually was one of the original classes planned for Classic World of Warcraft, but it was scrapped due to a lack of time. And it's quite possible that Blizzard had it planned that down the road, the Necromancer would be added to the game, and maybe quite possibly it was going to be a unique class to the Horde, kind of like the Shaman or the Paladin on the Alliance. And the reason why I say that is there's no NPC on the Alliance side of Classic WoW's storyline that seems to exist to teach the Alliance necromancy. So maybe Necromancer was going to be a Horde specific class at some point in the future. However, I think that as WoW's storyline progressed and more was written out, and of course with the decision to make Death Knight World of Warcraft's first new class edition, the plan maybe changed. The Necromancer was scrapped in favor of the Death Knight. Down the road, Warlocks started getting a little bit more summoning abilities. I mean, it's not really the Necromancer experience, but whatever. The Forsaken lore issue of dwindling population numbers, that was solved by the Valkyr rather than by Gunther Arcanus and his teachings of necromancy to the Forsaken. Blizzard sort of came up with alternative story ideas and just put Gunther Arcanus on a shelf to collect dust, seemingly forgotten by most players, but never forgotten by me, because when I started playing this game back in 2005 and I made my first Forsaken character, this NPC in particular was one of the most fascinating NPCs, characters, stories that I encountered in the game. And all these years later, I've been waiting to see what Blizzard is going to do with Gunther Arcanus, with a character of this degree of importance and power. But of course, over all these years, I've been rather disappointed, I confess, and maybe by making this video and maybe you guys sharing it, leaving comments, and maybe even a like, maybe we can remind Blizzard of this forgotten NPC and continue his storyline one day in the future with a future World of Warcraft expansion. Because at least in my opinion, a character like Gunther Arcanus should not be forgotten. And there's a lot of potential for this character to not only change the lore of the game forward, maybe bringing that necromancer class into World of Warcraft, but maybe even changing the gameplay as well, because having a full-on summoner class in the game would be pretty wild, wrestling with a bunch of undead skeletons and mages and abominations and all sorts of things. It would be really cool. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this little look into classic World of Warcraft. If you'd like to see more videos like this, let me know down in the comment section below. And if you want another video to watch, I highly recommend What Your World of Warcraft Class Says About You. It is on your screen right now. Check it out and see how accurate my stereotypes about you were. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will see you all soon.